Mark Lynd. I want to welcome you to the Remote Workplace series. Today we'll be discussing how cities are leveraging the remote workplace with my special guests, Stephen Elkins and Hugh Miller. Stephen Elkins is the CIO of the City of Austin and has been there nearly 10 years. Hugh Miller is the Head of Innovation Strategy at Netsync and is also the former CIO of the City of San Antonio. Well, we find ourselves in challenging time for the cities as they face the rapid rise of the remote workplace so they can provide the services their citizens need. How drastic did the city's priorities change in regard to technology given COVID-19?
Well, Mark, what we've realized when COVID-19 happened was that we were lacking in workflow. And so the first thing we needed to do was get people working remotely. So number one, make sure people had the right technology, they were secure, and they were able to connect and be productive. The second challenge was, how do we automate some of the manual processes that you don't see during the normal day-to-day operation? And an example of that would be where you have documents that you sign manually, put it in a folder, and you hand it off to somebody else. That can't happen anymore. And so you needed to quickly spin up a electronic signature tool and scale it across the whole city. That being said, we actually had pockets of these tools, but we didn't have it for everybody. So I would say that the changes and challenges that we face were getting people remote working, get them used to some new technology, get them used to a new way of interacting like we're interacting right now. This is how the city interacts now, like we're doing at this point in time. And that was not the case. I mean, there was a cultural change as well. When the city wanted to have meetings in the past, it was a calendar invite. You had to physically show up to a location and have your meetings. And so we had to get people used to using web conferencing as an effective means of having meetings.
Yeah, and I'm seeing, there are organizations that had preliminary thoughts on this type of workforce that had tools in place. Most of them, some didn't, which are lagging way behind. But like Steve in Austin and in San Antonio and Dallas and places that we've worked, there was some preparation that had been put in place, and the thought of remote work was already a component of the workplace. But then to shift everybody to it changed the mode for most organizations. So you had to identify what was the compute device that they were going to use remotely, what were the collaboration tools they were going to use. Do you have, like Steve said, do you have the license counts that keep you in compliance? And then you start meshing all this stuff together with tools that, ideally it now preps you for a completely different workforce for tomorrow that gives the doorway for a complete change in who you hire, how you hire them, where they work and when they work, and components like that. Because I feel like if we can define the deliverables that we need to for our employees, then we can basically rate how they work on the deliverables versus whether they've been sitting in a chair for 8 hours in the same building as everyone else, not really knowing whether they're giving you a full 8 hours of work that you're paying them for. So I feel like the change has actually opened up a whole new realm, but there was a lot of preparation that needed to be in place for that to happen.
Yeah, it's interesting. It didn't matter if you're talking to public or private sector, the one thing we've heard over and over and over was just the scale of it all, right? The sudden move, the sudden scale created so many challenges, ones that they just didn't anticipate prior. So being able to recover rapidly, plan extremely rapidly, obviously, and get that out there was something that was challenging, not only for the technology groups at these organizations, but also for the people themselves.
I would say it was probably less challenging for the technology groups. The technology groups had to spin up everybody else, The challenge for us was the volume, not the tech, but the volume. The challenge on the business side of things, and I'm saying that, the non-tech side, was they didn't have not everybody had the devices. Some people didn't have connectivity. And so not only did we had to provide devices, we also had to provide a means to connect. But there was this ask to provide MiFis for certain people, and 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 there was a challenge there because all the carriers were out of MiFis because everybody was going after them. So there was a group where we had to provide cell phones as a means of tethering to the cell phone as a way of having a hotspot.
Really, really amazing. It did what I think I also read an article that somewhere in, I don't know if it was Austin ISD or the city of Austin, they put Wi-Fi on buses to try to help bridge some of the gap. Is that right?
That's correct. So they did it. They may have done it in other places, but they did it in Capital Metro, which is not really a city department. It's quasi-city, but yeah, they put Wi-Fi on the buses.
Yeah, it was. Do you think some of that? Do you think some of the solutions or some of the way people have been able to, work quickly with technology? Do you think some of that is because Austin's known as a city for technology? Obviously, for outside of the Silicon Valley, Austin's probably number two.
I don't think it really had much to do with where we were geographically. I think the biggest piece was everybody across the country had to adapt to these solutions that were out there. And the reality is that government lagged in providing some of the same solutions that people were accustomed to when working with other entities. And an example of that is um, if you're dealing with your bank or you're dealing with some other provider, there you've probably already used a lot of that tech. You probably use chat features. If you have a problem with something, you'd be able to log in and have this chat feature, which would allow you to interact with somebody remotely. We didn't turn all those things on at the city until we got into this situation. But I think also other cities were facing the same challenges, and their workforce as well as the community were used to they were already used to some of this tech. So this shouldn't have been anything new. The new piece was it may not have been the same tech that they were using. And
Gotcha.
so it was just getting everybody spun up on a certain platform that they may not have had in the past.
Yeah, so Stephen and I had been at a lot of events together, and over the years, we've had conversations about developing the workforce to the point where we are today. And the interesting thing is the discussions were actually something that were going to be progressive. So you would start, like, we've always had IT people that worked remotely, and the progression would work through the organization, and that way you could reduce the footprint of the buildings and the different components that are very expensive for a business, and you reduce the traffic off the road during the morning and the evening where everyone jumps on. And the difficulty through time has always been typically on the business side, without understanding how to manage the people, manage sort of insurance requirements, HR components, and things like that. So it's very interesting how that conversation was happening, very slowly progressing to this point, and then boom, 95 to 100% of people are all now in this mode that, at some point we're recognizing this, there's a certain percentage that's going to stay. So
Yeah, that brings up a real interesting piece, Hugh, because so how did the continuity of operations plan work for the pandemic? And are there future changes coming?
Yeah, so there were two sides to this. There was the IT side of the continuity of operation, which seemed to work well. And then there was the business side of continuity of operation. The city had, each department needed a continuity of operation plan. My guess is that not everybody tested the plan.
Hmm.
And in turn, when the city made the decision over the weekend that we were going to go remote work, There were departments who did not have infrastructure. There were departments that did not know how to use the tools. And so I think going forward that we are going to be testing these plans. And I'm personally, with my department, will be adding other departments into our test. And so, because it helps us to see how we would respond to somebody else's continuity of operation plan. I think it was an exercise that everybody had to do, is to have an operations plan, but the tests were not, the plans were not tested in an integrated way. I think everybody had a plan that if my building is not functional, I'll just go to another building. It was never that I will go home and work. It was, I'll just go to another building and I will have the IT group spin up computers, and we'll just continue working that way. And again, everybody went home. There was no buildings to go to. And so I think the change that we're going to see in the future is that these plans will be tested, and they will be tested not independently, but with multiple teams. And I'm excited about that, because I don't think this is the last time we're going to go through an exercise like this.
One of the interesting things is that as you go through that effort with your organization, I remember in San Antonio, we took a whole year with every department to go through it. One of the hardest things is, what issue are you trying to customize that operation to? And to Stephen's point earlier, very rarely is a scenario where every single, like in San Antonio, we had over 500 buildings that we supported. Very rarely where you get to the point where every single building and every single resource is gone and unavailable to you. And so as you go through those efforts, you identify, here are the things that you anticipate could happen, and you build your response to it, and people think about it. I don't know if very many people ever thought that we would just lose every building and resource that we had without some major event like a disaster, physical disaster. So I think that made it really difficult. And one of the things that it opened up, though, that's really kind of nice, is the fact that now the organization will look to IT with a clear understanding that the business systems and the applications and the different things that we rely on to do our services every day now need to be available from wherever we are with whatever type of device. Because one of the complex things that always would happen is whether an organization decided to use Mac, or they decided to use Linux, or they decided to use Windows. Mm-hmm. At some point, where we are today in our technology, most of that shouldn't matter, right? We should be able to access stuff ubiquitously from wherever we are. And I think that is going to open up for a lot of things now with everything that we do. And to Stephen's point earlier, a lot of times government lags behind. But one of the complexities as a CIO that I'm sure Stephen can relate to is many of the systems that a city that's in the top 15 in the US, with the amount of transactions that they do, there are systems out there that are built that can't manage that many transactions. And so not only is the system lagging behind, but the ability for it to be available, like on the cloud or through some alternative way, puts it in a complex thing to try to manage this stuff as a CIO. And I think all this now will open up everybody's mind and eyes to say, that's just a must. It has to be available. And then you start looking at the security components and all the things wrapped around it.
Yeah, I was gonna, when you were talking especially that last part, all I could think in my head was, and then they're securing it, right? Securing those services and providing them in the way which they're secure. Stephen, have you seen a lot of challenges around security, or was it really about getting it up and going?
It was about getting it up and getting it going. But again, we were using existing technology. When we started this, we didn't go and do anything new or different initially. And the new things we did, we came up with a platform for residents to evaluate whether they needed to be testing, and they could schedule themselves to go get tested. We were using a Salesforce platform that had security built in. We used a chat bot from IBM. So we kind of went with some of the bigger players to ensure security was built in, but for the most part, we were really looking at speed. And I would say maybe not even quality at that point. It's how do we put something out sooner than later, and let's iterate on it and make it better as we go, because we couldn't go dark. And so speed was the priority.
We've been hearing that a lot, haven't we?
We have, and to your point earlier, Mark, as we look at this, where we are today, and you look at security wrapped around all this stuff, I mean, never was there a thought that pretty much all of your knowledge workers are going to be at home using their own internet, hopefully on a company's device that you could put some level of security around. But you've now just moved the whole network out into a realm of space that you really had never had any kind of oversight for. And so I think that what also will come out of this is just a complete different thinking of how we're going to do employee and end user device security, and ensure that it's access is available, but yet you're not exposing the organization to unnecessary things that they didn't have before. It's going to be very interesting how we look at that. Stephen, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, based on what has happened, have you had to do any kind of immediate sort of technology, like for example, Dallas had they're doing the assistance for like renters and mortgages, and they came up with an application process with a form that then they wanted to open up a call center that they didn't have capacity for. So they did a very quick effort to get a call center stood up, and various things like that were just sort of completely out of the norm.
We kind of shut down. So when we spun up initially, it was really on the city services side. It was really not on the resident side. So we shut down the parks, we shut down, the permitting center. So those kind of services actually kind of stopped while we were trying to figure out how do we get everybody up and running. And so the new things we spun up, right, was our chat bot. The other thing was the testing platform. But for the most part, we did not spin up anything new. I mean, we rolled out.
You changed your council meetings, right? They had to go remote.
Absolutely. So we had to go remote with council meetings, and we are a team shop, but we actually end up doing council meetings with WebEx because of the capability WebEx had that Teams would not allow. Teams, they allow you to put 4 tiles up of people at one time, and WebEx allows you to put up multiple people. And so we have 10 council members, we have a mayor, city manager, so we're able to show everybody to the residents. So again, it feels like we're conducting business as usual, even though we're in this remote workspace. So yeah, we actually had to stand that piece up. We're looking at how to do courts now.
I was getting ready to say. I was getting ready to ask you that.
So we're looking at how do we do courts, and again, we don't have it figured out just yet, but we're working toward that right now.
Yeah, because I was talking with the court clerk for San Antonio, who I'd worked with for several years. He was expressing the same concern and the same complexity that they have. They actually even used to do remote court kiosks. So they were sitting out at grocery stores and various things, so you could interact with a judge at a kiosk and pay fines and do all these different things, of which now you recognize, it was a hard sell back then. Now you recognize a big value with it. And I think that's, so as we talk about, engaging our employees, figuring out, okay, we got to move them out to the farther out away from the office, et cetera. The other part of that now, to your point, Stephen, you mentioned, is this is now the discussion about how do I manage the services and our customers or citizens able to function in a different environment that we've never had the need to before. I mean, there are pieces of it, obviously, and the desire to, but really now the systems that we look at, that's again a must that's going to have to be in place is how do I get them engaged with us in a way that's as similar as they were used to, or even better than what they were used to, so they don't have to drive to different places and linger with a whole bunch of people that they typically didn't like in the first place, and now it's kind of a must, especially for the next probably 6+ months.
I actually think that there's a lot of positives from a technology standpoint that are going to come out of this. I don't think it's for the next 6 months. I think a lot of the services are things you and I have talked about in the past. Hugh, how do we create these same experiences in working with government where you don't have to drive down and sign a piece of paper, swipe a credit card? How do we provide services like they're used to consuming services when interacting with non-government agencies? And so again, I think some of this stays. And we gotta, I was on a call today and we were talking about, instead of saying the new normal, we called it the next normal, because this is going to continue to iterate and evolve. And the next normal is going to be, how do we maintain some of these services? And one of the challenges is going to be, how do we get people to come back to work when they've shown productivity, working remote?
Right. Yeah, I love that next normal. And I think one of the things when we were prepping for this call, last week, Stephen, you were talking about your use of AI as a technology to help close some of that resource and need gap, to be able to provide these next norm type services.
Yeah, Mark, I had been pushing the use of AI for some time at the City of Austin, and the challenges that I always have is we seem to have more work than we have people. And so I always felt that AI was a partial solution to the finite resources we had. And so, but again, everybody was so busy doing the day-to-day operations. We actually did use cases. We identified several use cases where we thought AI would be used. Soon as this event happened, we spun up a chat bot immediately. And that was to start answering questions, because there were a lot of questions about what's going on with COVID. People could go to the CDC or they could go to some other place, but if they landed on the Austin page, we wanted to make sure that they could ask questions and get a response back on what was happening with COVID. And we want to link that to other things. And so it's almost a one-stop shop for COVID. If you want to get tested, you go through that same chat bot and says, hey, I got these symptoms. And it would say, you need to be tested, and here's where you would go. We haven't made that connection today, but that's where I want to get to. I want to have it as easy as possible for the residents to interact with us at the City of Austin. But again, I just, as much as I was pushing the use of AI at the city, this thing happened and we spun it up immediately. That was one of the first things we spun up. And we were seeing a lot of success with the number of users who are accessing the chatbot.
Stephen,
Go ahead, Hugh.
I was going to say, one of the things, as you look at your environment, and really it's compounded throughout the rest of the world, but right now you look at the cities where services are at the highest need, right? Where these things are happening, city services are very highly needed. Yet when you start listening to the chief financial officers and the city managers and the mayors, their budgets and the income and their everything is on a massive decline, with a very deep concern with the ability to actually provide these services. So it seems to me that what's going to happen is there's going to be a typically wanted burden put on the CIOs to come up with very creative ways to look at the services and work with the leadership to come up with ways to deliver those services in a different way that infuses more technology, but with the end of it, the intent of reducing the cost of delivering that service. And I think up until this happened, the expectation from the citizens was a specific way to receive that service, and a lot of it, was in, face to face and all these other different mechanisms, which now it's clear that that's going to be a different expectation. And kind of talk about, from your point, sort of what you're seeing, that the burden put it on you, plus advice to the other CIOs out there that are going to be watching this.
So you're right. Where we are having these conversations about the financial impact of the COVID-19 to the city as a whole. I don't think Austin is unique by any means than any other cities. I think everybody is feeling the financial impact. So one of the things we're actually going to look at is really getting a handle on our portfolio. How many different tool sets are we supporting, and why are we supporting? Why do we have 10 BI tools, and why do we have 20 of case management tools? And so we're really going to spend a lot of time figuring out how do we shrink our portfolio and in turn shrink our cost. But then to where you were going, Hugh, is and how do we start to deliver technology solutions that's going to meet the next normal, right? One of the things we're looking at is how do we not only manage our employees coming into the office, but how do we manage vendors and visitors coming into the office? And so we're going to be looking at some queuing software, so that you, just like you sign up to take your COVID-19 test, you may sign up for a time slot for a specific facility, and so again we can manage it that way. But again, right now the focus is on I think reducing the portfolio. A lot of the businesses, they're still not. They haven't come to us just yet with ideals on what the new normal or what the next normal looks like for them. But I do expect that to happen, and we're gonna respond, and we're gonna be ready for that. And I mean, it's actually, it's a good time for CIOs. That I tell you, every city call I'm on, there's always a thank you to the IT group for something we did, either it's with the health department, the emergency management department, or whatever department, we've responded in a quick fashion, and it feels like it's the right solutions for the right time.
Yeah, which is interesting, because prior to that, we typically didn't get much in the kudos, realm, so that's nice to hear.
Yeah, it's interesting. So Hugh kind of led me to really right into the last question I had, when that was, given what the two of you have seen, and what advice would you give or share with other community leaders in other communities on how to be prepared for the next issue or disaster? Because I think we're all three in agreement that we're going to see something again.
Yeah, I mean, so some of the things we talked about, I would say, make sure you test COOP plans, and not just your COOP, because that's what we did. We tested the IT COOP plan. We were ready. But again, us being ready is one of 40 departments. And so you need to make sure that you're testing COOP across the city. And I think the other piece is that, don't let, I don't mean this in the wrong way, but don't let a crisis, go away without taking advantage of some of the things, some of the technology that you needed to introduce anyway. If you've been wanting to do, multi-factor, but you haven't been able to get to it, now's the time. Do not walk away from those opportunities to introduce technology that needed to happen anyway.
Yeah, and so Stephen, with the continuity of operations plan, your COOP plan, to your point, somebody needs to be on that type of role that helps the different departments in the organization look at their pieces. Do you see that being requested out of IT, emergency operations? Like, what's your
I think so. We actually so from the prior director of emergency operations, that's where it sat. And so again, it was shelfware for the most part, that everybody checked the box, everybody had a plan, and it sat on the shelf. And it was never required to test the plan. And so I think the emergency management group is probably going to be the owner of it, not the IT shop. I think we're a partner, but we're not the lead on that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you say that. Like in San Antonio, it got punted over to me, specifically in the Chief Information Security Office's space. So it was in collaboration with emergency operations, but actually owned by the CISO office, who then had a 6 month and a 12 month cycle to regroup with everybody to do that work. I don't know if there's a clear, definitive place that it should reside, but to your point earlier, Stephen, it needs to be looked at. Like somebody needs to, even if it stays in every department, that there's someone in the department that does the looking at it. And to your question, Mark, earlier. So, and Steve and I have talked about this a lot in a lot of different occasions. The relationship that the CIO has is very important to be involved with every department leader, every leader. They literally need to be the one who has the most knowledge of the organization, the breadth of knowledge of the organization, because every one of the services is going to rely on a realm of technology. And somebody in IT needs to have a good understanding of those business processes to then be able to convert it into something like this that happens, to say, okay, here's where we are, but here's where we need to be. And we recommend this technology to be able to like fulfill that. Stephen's a great example of that relationship building CIO. But if you look through time, the role of the CIO continually changes and matures. This is really going to put them in a place that is different than before, but very necessary as a key leader inside of every organization.
Hey, Mark, and one other thought on this too, and Hugh made me think about this, is that scale your network beyond your city organization or your county organization, because this event happened to everybody. It happened to the county, it happened to the state, it happened to all the organizations in our community. And so we were all trying to solve the same problems. Back in the day, Hugh and I would meet quarterly because we knew we were all trying to solve the same problems. And we said, how can we help one another? That same thing needs to happen now as well. So you need to build your relationships, now, so that this morning I was on a call with Del Med, I was on a call with Travis County, and we were jointly talking about how do we share data? How do we help each other? Because your customers are our customers as well. And why do we need to solve that problem independently versus inclusively?
Yeah, and to your point, it ventures even into school districts and other traditional services, that there's the exposure of where we are today, especially with like broadband access and various things like, Austin's of a very, big benefit that, you have the greater Austin area telecommunications fiber network that gives you the avenue to do collaboration with, potential broadband, et cetera. A lot of places don't have that, but the idea should be that they're all coming together because, to your point, it's the same people you're getting the money for and that you're spending the money for. There needs to be this collaboration to make sure that you're getting the best value out of everything, and that that solution that you're building is for that whole group of people.
Yeah, it's interesting. Good. There's two universities that we're working with right now that don't like each other in the sports arena. but from a technology and administration perspective, they share a lot more than people would think or realize, right? And one of the things they're sharing is planning on what if this happens again. Can we merge our buying power? Can we introduce new technologies and share those? Really interesting pieces. There's been some really amazing insights. And I think, Stephen, you touched on that to what are the next steps? What is the next norm? And how can we prepare and identify for the things that will help us prepare for that and make sure that we give those services in a way that you truly befit our citizens and the investment that everyone makes with taxes, et cetera. Gentlemen, I know we could probably talk about this all day. I really, really appreciate your time. It's been fascinating. I'm sure the audience will find it fascinating, but Stephen and Hugh, I'd really like to thank both of you for joining me today.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Yeah, good times.
Good seeing you, Hugh.
Yeah, good to see you, Stephen. Yeah.